You will be bored of him in 2 years and will be interesting forever. Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 68 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about sidewalk chalk. My name is Nathan Pottle and thank you so much for joining me today. Now today is a special day in movie history on the day of this recording, not the day that the episode is released. But that day is, today is the 10th anniversary of the Christopher Nolan film Inception. And Inception is such a crazy good movie. I absolutely love it. If you haven't seen Inception, you should watch it. I actually just rewatched it recently. So I think tonight, in order to celebrate the anniversary of Inception, I think I'm just going to watch Dunkirk. Because it's been a while since I watched that one, and that movie is really good too. So Christopher Nolan is basically, he's just a really good director all around. You know, there are a couple of his movies that I really don't like, but overall, he's really strong and really good at what he does. So yeah, that's what's special about today. It's the 10th anniversary of Inception. Really, really crazy stuff. That means we must be also around the 10th anniversary of Toy Story 3. It's got to be around here somewhere. They came out kind of the same time, within a month of each other, I think. So we're also near the Toy Story 3 10-year anniversary, which is crazy to think about. And so we've got all these movies that came out 10 years ago that now we can celebrate their anniversaries. And I remember seeing Inception in theaters. And I remember seeing Toy Story 3 in theaters. Now, I'm not here to talk about those stories today, so I'm not going to tell you about my experience watching Inception in theaters for the first time. But it was great, and I remember just being absolutely blown away. Now, what I am talking about today is VHS tapes. If you're not familiar, if you're too young to know what a VHS tape is, I'm going to do a little bit of a history about them and then talk about how they are today. And the reason I'm talking about this is because last week, my wife has never seen the movie Dumb and Dumber, and I have Dumb and Dumber on VHS. So I said, like, hey, let's sit down and watch Dumb and Dumber, and we watched it. And while she enjoyed the movie, she didn't really like it as much as I like it. It's a lot of really juvenile, out there humor for the most part. There's some stuff that I don't like, but overall, I find it to be a strong comedy. But as we were watching this VHS tape, I really, really started thinking about how this was like the pinnacle of movie watching quality at one point for in the home. And now, like, we've gotten, like, how much farther we've come than VHS tapes. So I just want to talk about that a little bit and how, like, VHS tapes have not aged well. They just haven't. As a comparison, Inception came out 10 years ago. 10 years later, Inception is still an incredible movie. It's aged exceptionally well, but VHS tapes as a whole, they have not. So what is a VHS tape? If you don't know what it is, VHS stands for Video Home System, and it was made by a Japanese company named JVC, who were looking to create a form of at-home movie entertainment where you could have a movie or a TV show or something on a tape, or you could record something yourself on a tape recorder and then have it on a standardized system that you can then put into your machine, then you can watch it on your TV. So that's what they were setting out to make, and they ended up coming up with the VHS and VCR system. Now, there was stuff being worked on like this in the 1960s, but it was mostly for professional productions, so that's not for at-home use at all. But in 1976 is when they first released VHS in Japan, and then it came to North America in 1977, and it just completely changed the game. So now, instead of waiting for a movie to play on TV on a certain channel at a certain time, and you had to go through the TV guide to find out when what you wanted to watch was playing, now you could just go out and buy the tape and bring it home and watch it whenever you wanted. And it just completely changed everything. It was a huge deal. Now, VHS at the time, it was not the only one doing this kind of thing. There was another system out there called Betamax. Now, I don't know if you're familiar, but there was a big struggle for power. Was VHS going to win out, or was Betamax going to win out? And if you've never heard of Betamax, that's because they lost. To give it as kind of like a comparison, it was kind of like when DVD first came out, and it was like DVD or Laserdisc, and DVD won. And then when Blu-ray came out, it was Blu-ray versus HD DVD, and Blu-ray won as the standardized system. So it was a lot like that. Betamax was made by Sony, And then obviously, as I said, VHS is made by JVC, and they were really struggling for power here. Now, technically, Betamax was better. It had better picture quality on its tape. And how these tapes work is they use magnetic tape in order to record the audio and video, and then your VCR reads the magnetic properties on the tape and it translates it into the audio and visual of your film. But going back to Betamax, Betamax was a superior system, but it had a couple of fundamental flaws that ended up causing it to lose to VHS overall. So Betamax had better picture and audio quality. It looked better, it was nicer. But what the problem was is Betamax was smaller than VHS, which is a point in its favor, but it's also a point against it because Betamax could only hold an hour of recording on a single tape, as opposed to VHS, which could hold over 2 hours, 2 hours or more. And as they kept developing, they were able to cram more and more tape into a VHS, as opposed to the Betamax system, which was just stuck at the size it was and wasn't able to expand. But what Betamax did in order to lengthen its runtime is that instead of making it larger so they could fit more tape, they just slowed down the rotation of the tape. So it doubled in length, but because you're using less tape now for picture and audio quality, because you're using less tape, you're losing quality overall. So then by slowing down, Betamax really took a huge step backwards because now their picture and audio quality was actually worse than what VHS was. And by the time they were getting these things figured out, it was already too late. VHS had longer run times. It was a lot more accessible. It was ready to go for the consumer right out the gate. They didn't have to make changes. And that's how that story is written. VHS was also a simpler system than Betamax, and it was very easy to fast forward and rewind, and the rewind was actually a lot faster. So even though Betamax looked and sounded better, VHS had a lot of other things really going for it, and that's what caused it to win out in the end. And then from 1977 and for about 20 years, VHS was the number one. It was the biggest thing. And then in 1997 was when DVD first hit the market. So you could get discs with your movie on it, and you put it in a DVD player, and it reads it with a laser, and it looks better, and it sounds better, and it has menus, and you can include special features on these discs, and it could just do so much more that VHS eventually died out just because it couldn't compete with all the things that DVD could do. Now, it says here from my research that DVD first came out in 1997, so it slowly took its time for DVD to completely take over because everyone was so invested in this system that switching everybody over was kind of a big deal, especially because a DVD player can't play my VHS tapes. Well, you can get those combination machines. That's actually what I have downstairs in my basement. I have my Blu-ray player hooked up to my sound system, and then I have a separate machine that is a DVD player and VCR combo, and that's how we watch our VHS tapes. But those machines weren't super common at the time. They came out a little bit later, I believe. So getting everyone to switch to this new system, it took some time. So I remember the very first DVD I ever bought, it was in spring of 2004, and it was The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It was the first DVD my family ever had. We had to buy a DVD player in order to watch the movie, and that's what happened with DVD in my family. So it took 6 years after DVD was initially released is when my family finally got on board with it. And then you had DVD for a while, and then Blu-ray came out, and Blu-ray is better. And what's great is that Blu-ray players can play DVDs no problem. It doesn't work the other way around, though, so you do have to get a Blu-ray player to watch Blu-rays. You can't stick it in a DVD player and expect it to work. But that's how kind of our at-home stuff has evolved over time. And then obviously streaming came into play, so things like Netflix, Prime, Disney Plus, Crave, all of those different systems are out there now, so you don't even have to have a shelf full of movies. You could just pay a monthly fee and then scroll through movies and you pick one, and then you can watch it. You don't even have to leave the couch. You can do everything right from the remote. Which I do like the system of streaming. I do think that you lose a little bit of picture quality. I think my Blu-rays look better than when streaming something on TV. And that's just how it is. And I really like the physical media. I love my shelf of DVDs and Blu-rays, and having the VHS tapes downstairs, I think that's really nostalgic to have, and I like it a lot. I think it's fantastic. So, and that's what I'm wanting to talk about, is like the nostalgia feeling of all of this. So I grew up I was born in 1993, so from 1993 to 2004, so the first 11 years of my life, we had VHS tapes. And even after the fact, we still had VHS. So that's what I grew up watching. And you take the tape out, and if it's not working, you blow into the tape, make sure there's no dust or anything in there. You put it in the machine, you make sure it's rewound, and you go. And it's just, looking back on it now, it's not a really good system at all. Because if you watch VHS tapes enough, you'll wear them out and then they won't work anymore. For example, I remember watching 2 VHS tapes again and again and again and again when I was a kid. Toy Story was the big one. I loved Toy Story and wore out that VHS tape. It was done. Not working anymore. We had to get a second one. And then there was another VHS tape that I had of a movie called We're Back. It's not a super well-known movie. I think it's from Universal Pictures, but it's an animated movie about dinosaurs that are brought forward in time to modern day, and they go through New York and they explore and they do stuff. And I loved this movie as a kid. Dinosaurs were just the coolest, greatest thing. I loved We're Back. Eventually, I got into Jurassic Park and really, really loved that movie. I actually just watched Jurassic Park in theaters the other day, and oh my goodness, it was incredible. And what little kid doesn't love dinosaurs? So We're Back and Toy Story were the big movies that I really watched all the time. And then we had all the other Disney movies on VHS tape, and it was really great. Now, I did some research into nostalgia. And nostalgia is something, if you're not familiar with the term, nostalgia is like a fondness for something from the past, is kind of a basic definition of what it is. And I've read in this article that nostalgia can actually be addictive, and people can be overly obsessed with things from their past, and like nothing in modern day is good enough. So it's always like looking back on better days, right? So feeling nostalgic about something, it can make you feel warm and safe and loved and valued. These are things that were in that article that I read. And it was fascinating because I have felt these feelings a lot, and that's exactly what a lot of movies these days are playing off of to give you those feelings in order to get you to go watch their movies. There are 2 movies in particular that are packed with nostalgia that is just like meant to make you like long for that time that is past now. Those 2 movies are The Force Awakens and Ready Player One. So obviously The Force Awakens is basically a combination of episode 4 and episode 6 of Star Wars, and it really plays a lot of things that you've seen again and again in Star Wars, a lot of the same tropes. And that was done very much on purpose. It's not because they didn't have any ideas for doing new stuff. It's not because they are not creative enough. It's because they wanted to pack a punch, a nostalgic punch, right into your emotions. They wanted you to feel like you felt when you were a kid in the 70s watching Star Wars for the first time, because you were basically watching an updated version of the same movie. And that's why that movie made so much money and people loved it so much. And then when The Last Jedi came out and it was nothing like Star Wars that you remember, it was completely new and different and did things that maybe you didn't like, then a lot of people lashed out because like, oh, this is not my Star Wars. And it didn't give people those feelings of warm and safe and feeling valued and loved. It gave them something completely new, and a lot of people rejected it because it wasn't familiar to them. And I think that's why something like DVD took 6 years for my family to get on board with it, because it was not familiar to us. And I think that there's something inherent about us that like change. A lot of people say change is good, but I think a lot of people are hesitant to change, myself included. Change can be scary. It can be, you're venturing out into the unknown basically. And so I think having that nostalgia for things really lets people crawl back into their past, into something they're familiar with, and makes them feel a lot more secure than maybe they are in modern day. And then going back, obviously Ready Player One is very nostalgic of the 1980s and 1990s. There isn't too much 90s stuff in the book Ready Player One, and actually the book Ready Player Two was announced that's coming out in October or November. I think it's November. But either way, I'm really excited for that book. I'll definitely be reading it when it comes out. And so going back to it, even though I wasn't born in the 1980s or grew up there, I was born in the 90s, even though I didn't live in that time, I still can feel nostalgia for it because it's something that I was still exposed to when I was younger, like 1980s music and 1980s styles and fashions and all these different things. So those two movies are just so packed full of nostalgia that it's meant to make you feel a lot better and make you like the movie more because of that nostalgia. But taking this whole discussion about nostalgia and circling it back to VHS, when I sat down and I watched Dumb and Dumber with my wife, about halfway through the movie started skipping and getting fuzzy. And by the end of the film, everyone's voices were like an octave lower and they sounded like they were all talking really low because there was something wrong with the VHS tape. And so I didn't feel very nostalgic for it at the time. I felt great about it at first, but then as we got farther into the movie and I realized just how awful the picture quality was and how terrible the sound quality was, and having to watch through it like the image skipping around and getting fuzzy in parts, it doesn't give me those same feelings that I had as when I was a kid, because when I was a kid I didn't care about stuff like that. If the movie played, awesome. That's what I wanted. But now I demand so much more from movies. I can't watch a movie of poor picture and audio quality because it's going to drive me crazy. I want something to be of the quality that the filmmakers are intending for me to watch. I can't watch something that doesn't work, and that's why a lot of movies on VHS I've since rebought on Blu-ray so that I can have the movie watching experience that I want. I did a little bit more research here about VHS tapes and their shelf life. So depending on how they're stored, they can last anywhere from 10 to 30 years. As time goes on, the tape, they can become demagnetized and not work, or the tape itself can just deteriorate and fall apart. A lot can go wrong with a VHS tape in order for it to not give you the movie watching experience that you really want out of watching something from home, right? As opposed to a Blu-ray disc, which is scratch resistant and everything is contained within itself. It has a much longer shelf life than a VHS tape has. And so when I sat down to watch this VHS, I was devastated. That's the only word I can use, is that I was devastated in what I was watching, and I couldn't believe that this was what I grew up watching. And VHS tapes really helped me fall in love with movies because I could watch them whenever I wanted. But at the same time, looking back on it, I can't go back to that as a regular movie watching experience. Even though I'll feel nostalgic about it, as soon as I sit down to watch that movie, I'm not going to have a good experience. And maybe some people out there really enjoy that VHS experience, but as time goes on, those tapes are going to deteriorate more and more, and they're not going to work as well, and you're just not going to be happy with what you're watching. So I think in the next little while, I am going to work on getting rid of all my VHS tapes, completely replacing them with Blu-ray discs, or a lot of our VHS tapes are actually Disney, so a lot of those are on Disney Plus, so we can watch them there. So that's what is going to happen, and I think we're going to completely cut VHS out of our lives because I can't live like this. I can't watch movies like this. And I don't very often. I watched Dumb and Dumber, and then I think the last VHS I watched was Chicken Run, which actually worked pretty well. It wasn't completely awful, but it was still not great. And then before that, I don't even remember the last VHS before that I watched. So I don't watch them very often, but it's often enough that it reminds me that this is not what movie watching is supposed to be. As important as VHS was in pushing forward, getting movies into the home, and home theater systems soon followed after that, and getting projectors and surround sound systems and all of that inside your house, as integral as VHS was in that, looking back on it now, it's not a system that has the shelf life or the longevity that we can then have in perpetuity. We just can't. I think that's pretty much all I have to say about VHS tapes, though. So my question for you guys today is, do you have VHS tapes at home? Are you familiar with the experience? Am I way out of line here talking about VHS this way? Or do you feel the same way I do? I would love for you to let me know, and let's have a conversation about it. You can reach out to me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at PottleNathan, and you can find the show on Instagram at Movies Are Awesome Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to subscribe to the show. You can do so on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. I've got all those linked down in the show notes below. thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It really means a lot to me. Normally, these kinds of episodes that I do, when they're not reviews of movies, they normally don't get as many views as my review episodes have. So if you guys are sticking around to listen to this, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.